The night was darker than usual. The wind howled across the empty plains of Nova Haven Colony. Where most humans had left long ago, only a few survivors stayed. One of them was a man named Evan Cross. Evan lived alone in a small steel cabin near the frozen edge of the valley. His heater made a soft humming sound, and the only light came from the faint glow of a solar lamp. Outside, snow hit the metal walls like sand against glass. He sat at his worn-out table, reading an old digital journal, trying to ignore the silence. It had been 3 years since the war ended. 3 years since he had last spoken to anyone who wasn't on a radio. Then, in the middle of the storm, came a sound he hadn't heard in a long time, a knock. Gentle but desperate, Even froze. His hand stopped halfway toward the mug of coffee. Another knock followed, louder, shaking the thin door. He grabbed his blaster out of habit, his soldier instincts waking again. No one came out here, not unless they had a death wish. He moved slowly toward the door. The wind screeched through the cracks. He pressed his ear close and heard a faint voice, trembling and weak. "Please. Anyone. Please help me." It was a girl's voice. Soft, fragile, and filled with fear. Evan frowned. Could it be a trap? Pirates sometimes used tricks like that to lure lonely colonists. But something in that voice didn't sound fake. It sounded broken. He unlocked the latch. Just a little snow burst through the gap, and through it he saw her small, thin, wearing torn fabric that wasn't enough for the cold. Her skin was pale blue, almost glowing under the stormlight, and her eyes, silver like liquid metal, looked up at him with tears frozen on her cheeks. She wasn't human. Evan's pulse quickened. "You're an alien," he whispered, his weapon slightly raised. The girl nodded weakly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just need warmth, please." Her lips were trembling so much the words barely came out. She looked ready to fall any second. Evan hesitated. The law was clear. No human was allowed to shelter an alien refugee. Anyone who did could be arrested, executed, or worse. Still, she didn't look like a threat. She looked like a dying child. "Where are your people?" he asked, his tone cautious. "They're gone," she whispered. "The camps burned." Her knees gave out. She fell forward. Evan caught her before she hit the metal floor. Her skin was ice cold, and he could feel the faint pulse under his hand. He stared at the door, at the storm outside, then at the girl in his arms. His mind screamed, "Don't do this." But his heart whispered, "You already did," with a sigh. He kicked the door shut and carried her to the couch. Her light body hardly weighed anything. He wrapped her in a thermal blanket. The heater's orange glow spread slowly, turning her blue skin into a softer shade. She looked so peaceful for a moment that Evan forgot she was an alien. He poured hot water into a cup and placed it beside her. When her eyes finally opened again, they were wide with confusion and gratitude. "You helped me," she said quietly. Evan nodded. "Just until the storm passes." "Thank you," she murmured, trying to sit up, but she winced, clutching her arm. There were marks, burns, deep and strange, like wires had been fused under her skin. "What happened to you?" Evan asked. Frowning, she turned away. "Humans," she said softly. "They took me. They tested us." Evan didn't reply. He didn't want to believe it. But he knew the rumors. After the war ended, some human divisions had turned to illegal research, mixing alien DNA with machines. The girl looked around the room, her eyes resting on a small photo of a human woman and a little boy on Evan's shelf. "Your family?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Gone. Long time ago?" Silence filled the cabin again, broken only by the hum of the heater and the wind outside. After a while, she spoke again. "My name is Lyra." "Evan," he replied. Lyra smiled faintly. "You're kind." "Evan." He shook his head. No, just stupid. But even as he said it, he placed another blanket over her shoulders. Making sure she was warm, she closed her eyes, whispering something in a language he didn't understand. It sounded like a prayer, soft and sad. Evan sat back on the chair, watching the storm hit harder against the windows. He knew he had just made a choice that could ruin his life. Harboring an alien was treason, but looking at her small, trembling hands, he couldn't bring himself to care. He turned off the main light and let the fire glow quietly in the corner. Outside, somewhere far beyond the valley, search drones patrolled the night skies. Scanning for escapees, Lyra stirred in her sleep, whispering, "They'll find me soon." Evan's eyes opened at the words. His jaw tightened. He looked at his weapon lying on the table, then at the fragile girl who had knocked on his door. The storm screamed louder, shaking the metal cabin, and for the first time in years, Evan felt something he thought was long gone purpose. He whispered to himself, "Let them come," as snow kept falling, covering the last footprints leading to his door. The storm had calmed by morning, but the world outside Evan's cabin still looked like a frozen grave. Snow covered every track. The wind carried only silence. Evan stood by the window, a steaming mug in his hand. Watching the pale horizon, the sky was dull gray, heavy with clouds that refused to move. Somewhere beneath that sky, people were hunting soldiers, patrol drones, scavengers searching for things better left unfound. Behind him, the girl named Lyra stirred. Her silver eyes opened slowly, blinking against the faint light. She looked confused for a moment, then remembered where she was. "Morning," Evan said quietly. Not turning around, Lyra nodded weakly, wrapping the blanket closer around herself. Her voice was soft. "You didn't throw me out. I said you could stay until the storm passes," Evan replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "That doesn't mean you're safe," Lyra smiled faintly. "No one ever is," she said, her tone sad but calm. Evan finally turned to face her. She looked less fragile now, but still pale. Her arms were covered in strange burns lines and spirals that glowed faintly like embers under her skin. They looked unnatural, painful, alive. He frowned. "Those marks? They're not from cold, are they?" Lyra looked down at her hands. The glow pulsed softly beneath the skin. "They did this to me," she whispered. "Humans." From the labs, Evan felt a sting in his chest. "What kind of labs?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "The ones who wanted to mix us," she said quietly. "To see how much of your metal can survive in our blood." She lifted her sleeve, revealing thin metal filaments running along her veins. They shimmered faintly with blue light. "They called it Project Halo," she added, her voice trembling. "We were supposed to be weapons." Evan clenched his jaw. The name sounded familiar. He had seen it once in a classified report during his service. The project had been shut down, or so he thought. He sat on the edge of the table, staring at her. "How did you escape?" Lyra hesitated, then spoke. "A soldier helped me. He said he couldn't watch anymore. He opened a door and told me to run. I don't even know his name." She looked down. "He died for it," Evan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You picked a bad place to run to," he muttered. "This colony doesn't welcome anyone anymore. Not even humans." "I didn't choose," Lyra said softly. "I just kept walking until I saw your light." Evan looked at her again, trying to keep his voice cold. But something inside him was shifting. The way she spoke, the way she shivered even when the heater burned bright. It reminded him too much of his son, small, helpless, trusting. He pushed the thought away. "You need food," he said. Opening a storage cabinet, he handed her a ration bar. "It's not much," Lyra smiled politely. "It's more than I had," she whispered, breaking the bar slowly as if afraid it would vanish. For a while, they ate in silence. The sound of the heater filling the space, and a soft humming filled the air. Faint but sharp, Evan's eyes narrowed. He knew that sounded Rome. Hovering outside, he rushed to the window, peeking through the frozen glass. A small reconnaissance drone floated above the snow, scanning the area with red light. Lyra stiffened, her breathing quickened. "They found me," she whispered. Clutching the blanket tightly, Evan turned to her. "How do they track you?" Lyra looked terrified. I think there's a beacon inside me," she said, her voice breaking. "They said they needed to monitor success rates. I didn't know what that meant until now." Evan cursed under his breath, grabbed a toolbox, and pulled out a small scanner. "Lie down," he ordered. Lyra hesitated, but obeyed. He ran the scanner over her chest and arms until it beeped. A small metallic implant flickered on the display, buried near her shoulder. "There it is," he muttered. "We remove it, or they'll come straight here." Lyra's eyes widened. "You can't. It's part of me now. It's fused," Evan frowned. "Then I'll find another way." He opened an old electromagnetic jammer, the kind used by smugglers, placed it near her arm, and switched it on. The room hummed with static. The implant's glow dimmed. "That should scramble the signal," he said. For now, Lyra looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. "You don't even know me." Evan looked away, his voice low. "Because I've seen enough people suffer while others watched." Lyra blinked, her lips trembling into a small smile. "Then maybe you're not like the rest." Evan didn't reply. He turned back to the window, watching the drone move away, still scanning the snow. After a long silence, Lyra whispered, "They'll send more." Evan nodded. "Then we'll be ready." Her glowing eyes lingered on him for a moment longer before she drifted into uneasy sleep, whispering something in her alien language, something that sounded like a name, or maybe a prayer. Evan sat quietly, staring at the old blaster on his table, thinking about the life he once had, the family he lost, the world that forgot mercy, and now this strange girl with scars that shone like stars. He didn't understand why he cared, but he did, maybe because deep inside, he knew she was not the threat. She was the proof that humanity still had a chance to be human. Outside, the cold wind returned, carrying the faint echo of engines far away. The hunt had already begun. Evan whispered to himself, "You should have kept the door closed." But he didn't mean it. Not anymore. The morning sun never truly rose on Nova Haven. The sky only changed from black to silver, a dull light spreading across the frozen wasteland. Evan stood outside his cabin, the cold biting through his coat, staring at the horizon where faint shapes moved through the fog. He had seen them before, metal silhouettes with wings that didn't flap, eyes that glowed red, the government's patrol drones. They were scanning sectors, one by one, hunting something or someone inside. Lyra was still sleeping, the blanket wrapped tightly around her, her silver eyes flickering under closed lids. She whispered in her sleep again, her voice trembling like she was reliving a nightmare. Evan stepped back inside and locked the door, his hand automatically checking the blaster at his belt. His heart beat harder than he wanted to admit. He switched on his old radio and turned the frequency dial slowly until a static-filled voice broke through. Sector 12 confirmed alien fugitive sighted, approach with caution, suspect, may be armed or enhanced. Evan froze, his fingers tightening on the radio knob. That was only 3 miles away. He turned toward Lyra, who had woken up, her face pale. "They're close, aren't they?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded. "They're sweeping this sector next." Lyra pulled the blanket tighter, fear flickering in her eyes. "If they find me, they'll kill you too." Evan gave a dry laugh. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried, but deep down he knew this was different. This wasn't a normal manhunt. They were hiding something bigger, something the government didn't want anyone to see. Lyra stood up slowly, the faint glow under her skin pulsing again. She looked weaker than before. I should leave. I can't bring this on you. Evan blocked the door. You won't last 10 minutes out there, he said firmly. They'll find you before you take 20 steps. Her eyes shimmered with tears. Then what do we do? He thought for a moment, then pointed to the trapdoor near the corner of the cabin. The cellar. They moved fast. Pulling the rug aside and lifting the metal hatch, a cold draft rushed upward. Evan grabbed a small lantern and led her down the narrow steps. The air smelled of dust and machine oil. This used to be a maintenance tunnel during the mining days, he said quietly. No scanners reached this deep. Lyra nodded, her breath visible in the cold air. You know how to hide things well, she whispered. Evan managed a small grin. I had practice. They sat in silence, listening to the distant hum above them. Through the thin ceiling came the low whirring of engines. A faint metallic voice called out. Human residents detected. Thermal readings inside. Initiating scan. Lyra covered her mouth to stop her breathing. Evan placed a hand on his blaster, the tension in the air thick enough to choke. A red light glowed faintly through the cracks. The sound of mechanical claws scraping the cabin roof made Lyra flinch. Then silence. A long minute passed before Evan dared to whisper. They're moving on. Lyra let out a shaky breath, tears forming in her eyes. They won't stop. You know, she said softly. They never stop until they erase what they fear. Evan looked at her. Then tell me, what are they so afraid of? She hesitated, her glowing fingers clutching the blanket. Because I have something, she said quietly. Something they created but couldn't control. He frowned. What do you mean? Lyra met his gaze, her silver eyes reflecting the lantern light. They made me part of Project Halo, but I wasn't the first. There were others, test subjects. Most of them didn't survive, but before the last explosion, I copied the data. It's inside me now. In my neural core. Evan stared, realization dawning. You're saying you have proof? Lyra nodded. Every experiment, every dead child. Every lie they buried, she whispered. If I can reach a data relay, I can send it to the Galaxy network. Evan rubbed his face. So they're not chasing you because you escaped. They're chasing you because you know the truth. Lyra nodded again, her eyes shimmering with guilt. And I led them here. He shook his head. No, you didn't lead them here. I opened the door. They sat in silence for a long time, the lantern flickering between them. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering all signs of the patrol. Evan finally spoke. If you really have that data, then we can't stay here. They'll come back with more. Lyra looked at him, fear and hope fighting in her eyes. You'll help me? She asked softly. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stood up and checked his old gear locker, pulling out a thick coat, a spare blaster, and a small communicator. We'll move when night comes, he said. Through the ridge tunnels. They won't scan there. Lyra nodded slowly, her voice shaking. Why, Evan? Why risk everything for me? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Because if I don't, then I'm no better than the men who made you bleed. Lyra's lips trembled. She looked away, whispering something too quiet for him to hear. Hours passed. The storm grew stronger again, hiding their tracks but also making escape harder. Evan checked the window one last time. The patrol lights were gone, but he knew they'd be back. He glanced at Lyra, sleeping lightly beside the heater, her scars glowing faintly like constellations under her skin. He whispered to himself, what have I gotten into? But deep down, he knew the answer. He had found a reason to fight again, a reason to stand outside. The wind howled through the frozen valley, carrying the echo of engines far away. The hunt wasn't over. It was only beginning. The night had fallen heavy over Nova Haven. The snow glowed faintly under the red moon. Evan and Lyra stood at the edge of the frozen ridge, their breaths turning to mist. Behind them, the cabin was gone, burned in the distance by search patrols who found nothing but ash. They had been walking for hours through old mining tunnels and frozen valleys, every step echoing in the silence. Evan led the way, his blaster held tight. Lyra followed close behind, wrapped in a thick coat that looked too big for her, her glowing scars faintly lighting the path like tiny stars. "Are you sure this way is safe?" she asked softly. Her voice shaking, Evan gave a small laugh. "Safe? No, but it's quiet, and quiet means alive," Lyra smiled weakly. But she was pale, her energy fading. The cold and stress were taking their toll. Her legs trembled, and once she stumbled. Evan caught her before she fell. "You need rest," he said. Helping her to sit beside a half-collapsed wall, Lyra shook her head. "No time." "They'll come again. They already came," Evan replied, sitting next to her, "and we're still breathing. That's good enough for now." The wind outside howled through the broken tunnel vents, a sound like distant voices calling their names. Evan looked at her glowing hands, the light flickering weaker now. "You're getting worse," he said quietly. Lyra took a slow breath. "The implant, it's breaking down," she whispered. "My body isn't made to hold human tech this long." Evan clenched his jaw, frustration mixing with fear. "Tell me there's something I can do." She looked at him with tired eyes. "You already are," she said softly. "You gave me time. That's more than anyone else did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the old ventilation pipes. Evan closed his eyes, remembering the photo of his wife and son. The laughter, the warmth, the promise he made to never care again after losing them. Yet here he was, caring anyway. Suddenly, a faint red light blinked on the snow outside the tunnel. Evan's instincts flared. He crawled to the opening, peering through the frost. Drones, 5 of them, moving slowly in formation. Their lights scanning the ridges, voices crackled through their coms. "Target is confirmed in this sector. Approach with thermal sweep." Evan's heart pounded. He turned to Lyra. "They found us," Lyra stood weakly, her glowing eyes wide. "Go. Leave me. They want me." "Not you." Evan shook his head. "I've left enough people behind," he said firmly. "We run together." They sprinted through the tunnels, boots crunching against ice, the sound of engines following close behind, red beams cutting through the snow like fire. One drone fired. The blast hit the ground near them, scattering debris. Evan shielded Lyra with his body, pulling her into a side passage. "Down here," he said, leading her through a narrow path that opened into a maintenance shaft. They crawled inside, breathing heavily. Lyra clutched her side, her glowing marks flickering wildly. "Evan," she whispered, "if they capture me, they'll erase everything, the data, the truth." Evan grabbed her shoulders, his eyes burning. "Then we don't let them." "Do you hear me?" She nodded weakly, tears forming. "But you'll die for me," he smiled faintly. "Then I'll die doing something that matters." They reached the end of the shaft, a small hatch leading outside. The icy wind hit their faces as they climbed out. The horizon glowed with red lights. The patrol was closing in. Evan looked back at her, then at the sky filled with snow and fire. He saw fear in her eyes, but also something else, trust. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. They ran toward the old relay tower standing crooked against the cliff. It was dead, frozen, but its antenna still pointed to the sky. "That's our only chance," Evan said. "We get your signal out from there." Lyra hesitated. "It's too old." "I'll make it work," he replied. Already climbing the icy ladder, Halfway up, a shot rang through the air. Evan flinched as a plasma bolt grazed his shoulder. Pain searing down his arm, he held on. Gritting his teeth below, soldiers appeared from the snow. Armored and silent, red visors glowing. One of them shouted, "Stand down, human." "She's property of the Directorate." Evan looked down at Lyra, her silver eyes staring up at him, full of fear and defiance. He shouted back, "She's not property." He reached the top, smashed the panel open. Wires and ice spilling out. His hands moved fast. Reconnecting old circuits, sparks flew. The tower hummed faintly. Lyra stood below, holding her chest, the energy inside her rising like light through glass. Her voice trembled. "Evan, they're aiming," he shouted. Just a few more seconds, the soldiers advanced. Guns raised, red beams targeting them both. Lyra took a step forward, her body glowing brighter. The snow around her starting to melt. "Don't," Evan yelled. But it was too late. She raised her hands, and a burst of light exploded outward, knocking the soldiers off their feet. The drones crashed into the snow one by one. The storm itself seemed to freeze mid-air. When the light faded, Lyra was on her knees, trembling, the glow fading from her body. Evan jumped down and ran to her side, grabbing her before she fell. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, voice cracking. She smiled weakly. "You told me not to give up," she whispered. "I didn't." In the distance, the relay tower flickered alive. The old system struggling but working. Evan looked up, hope rising again. Then he heard its footsteps, heavy and close. Human soldiers approaching from both sides, their commander's voice echoing. Cold and sharp. "Step away from the alien human." "That's an order." Evan stood slowly, pulling his blaster, his jaw tight, the snow swirling around him. He looked down at Lyra, then back at the soldiers. For the first time in years, his choice was clear. He whispered, "No," and fired. The echo of blaster fire split the frozen night. The snow lit up with bursts of red light. Evan fired again and again, each shot ringing through the valley. The soldiers advanced through the storm, shouting orders, their visors glowing like demons in the mist. Lyra lay behind a broken wall, struggling to move. The glow under her skin flickered weakly. She looked up at Evan, bleeding, defiant, standing between her and the approaching soldiers. "Evan," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Stop. You'll die." He reloaded his blaster, smoke rising from the barrel. "Not before they do," he said, his voice steady. A plasma bolt hit the ground near him. Snow exploded. Evan dove behind a metal beam, firing back, his aim sharp despite the pain in his shoulder. The soldiers closed in fast, surrounding them. "Don't make it harder," the commander shouted through his helmet speaker. "Hand over the alien, and you walk away." Evan laughed bitterly. "That's the problem with your kind," he said, standing taller. "You think she's something to hand over." The commander raised his weapon. "You're under arrest for aiding a fugitive experiment." Evan's eyes burned. "She's not an experiment. She's a person," he shouted, pulling the trigger again. The commander ducked behind cover, signaling his men. "Take him alive if possible." The next blast hit Evan's side. He fell to one knee, gasping, blood staining the snow. Still, he didn't stop. He fired again, his hand shaking but his will unbroken. Behind him, Lyra crawled forward, her hands glowing brighter, the energy pulsing like a heartbeat. She looked at him, tears mixing with snow. "You can't protect me forever," she said softly. Evan turned to her, his face pale but calm. "Then make it count," he said. "End this, Lyra. Show them the truth." She closed her eyes, focusing. The circuitry under her skin flared with light. The air trembled as her energy grew. The soldiers hesitated. their scanners flashing red warnings. "Sir? Energy spike detected. She's overloading," one of them shouted. The commander yelled, "Stop her, now." They opened fire. Bolts of plasma cutting through the air. Evan stood in front of her, taking the hits meant for her, his body burning, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You're safe." "I promised." Lyra reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his arm, her voice shaking. "Evan, no." He smiled faintly. Too late to argue. Then the light consumed everything. A massive wave of blue and white energy erupted from Lyra, blinding and pure. It spread across the valley, disarming weapons, melting armor, shutting down drones. The soldiers fell to the ground, blinded by brilliance. When the storm cleared, silence reigned. The air shimmered faintly with heat. Snow melted into steam. Evan lay motionless, the glow of Lyra's energy wrapping around him like a shield. His wounds stopped bleeding, healed by the light that came from her heart. Lyra knelt beside him, weak but alive, her glow fading, her eyes dimming. She placed her hand on his chest and whispered, "You gave me a home, human, not just walls, but warmth." He opened his eyes slowly, his vision blurry. "You did all this?" he said softly. Lyra smiled through her tears. "We did it together," she whispered, her voice fading with every word. "Now they'll know what they've done." Her body shimmered one last time, the marks on her skin turning into faint silver lines. Then she fell still, her hand slipping from his. Evan sat there for a long time, holding her, the world quiet again, the snow falling gently, as if afraid to touch her. In the distance, alarms echoed across the comm channels. Her data, her truth, had been transmitted through the relay tower before it collapsed. The entire network now receiving every file, every secret, every proof of what the Directorate had done across the colonies. People watched in shock as images appeared on their screens. Files marked Project Halo, experiments, crimes, lies. The story of a girl who wanted nothing but shelter, and a human who gave it to her. Evan stood slowly, the wind blowing through his torn coat. He looked at the soldiers lying unconscious in the snow, then at the sky that had finally cleared. He carried Lyra's body to the edge of the ridge where the stars shone brightest. He built a small cairn of stones and placed her inside, wrapping her in the blanket she once clutched to survive. On a metal plate he carved words with his knife. Hands trembling but sure, she begged for shelter and gave humanity a soul. He placed it above her resting place, then sat beside it, staring at the horizon where dawn began to break. Light spreading slowly over the frozen world. Evan whispered, "You changed everything," his voice soft but strong. "They'll remember you." A faint breeze moved across the snow, carrying a shimmer of silver dust into the rising sun. And for a brief second, Evan thought he heard her voice again, gentle and warm. "Thank you, Evan," he smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "Rest now, Lyra," he whispered. "You're home." The light of a new day rose over Nova Haven, no longer just a frozen wasteland, but a place where a human heart had defied the law, and in doing so, reminded the galaxy what it meant to be human.